Hello! So I just thought I'd better wake you all up. You know, as I say, your attack surface is increasing. This is obvious. You know, how many people here do not have home workers, flexible workers and mobile workers in their organisation? See, I'm asking all the really easy questions. Okay? Quite right. If you're carrying that laptop around with you, you are effectively your network perimeter. Okay? And there's mobile devices, etc. So it goes without saying that we're changing the rules. So no longer does security just exist inside that walled garden that we created that basically was separated by a bunch of firewalls, because effectively your endpoint has to become a firewall. The other key thing in life is that there's regulation, and more regulation. And whilst we have a mess going on in politics at the moment, the one thing that politicians love doing is they're basically called lawmakers in the United States. They like making laws and regulations because everybody wants certainty and validation. So we are going to see more and more of this, and you're going to hear another word that has become massively used. And I'm going to say 10 years ago, how many people had heard of governance as an everyday term, apart from Neville? Many of us? Okay. It was sort of just coming in as a thing, unless you're a politician or something like that. How many of you these days can escape from the word governance as part of your daily lexicon? Not many of us. Okay? But this is really, so regulation complexity. So what we're going to try and do is say, well, actually, let's embrace this regulation and let's try to minimize the complexity to give us some really good answers and use it as an effective business tool to improve the organization, improve certainty, and make your lives easier and more secure. So, you say, you're a miracle worker. How can we possibly do this? Well, what we're trying to do is make sure that business gets the assurance that it needs. And key thing is, particularly business these days is not just your organisation, it's all your partners. So we have friends and customers and colleagues from local authorities. Now, local authorities are joined up with NHS, with social care, with third sector. You know, anyone in a commercial organisation will have links with trading partners, and these links are predominantly electronic these days. You know, we have government departments that talk to other government departments and provide services for even more government departments. You know, so everybody is talking to everybody else, and everybody is transacting digitally. The key thing about these digital transactions is actually maintaining the trust between partners, and how do we do that? Okay, so what we're looking at is how do we provide that framework of trust between organisations that says, because your supply chain or your governance or your security is only as good as the weakest link in that chain. Now, a few years ago now, but we had a customer who deals a lot and imports from China. Quite a large organisation, about 1,500 users in the UK, about 1,000 users out in Hong Kong and China. We've obviously dealt with a myriad of Chinese manufacturers, and this is about 4 or 5 years ago. A single poorly supported PC inside one of their manufacturing partners got infected and took down their network worldwide for 72 hours, and probably it took them about 15 to 20 weeks to properly remediate that. There are many other examples. There's people like Maersk, you know, again, shut down. And all of these come through giving that trust in the supply chain. So what we're saying is, how can we use compliance and how can we use this to help ourselves and help everybody else? So the first thing in life is the mantra, you cannot manage what you can't control. So what we're trying to do is say, okay, but that's fine with inside your own organisation, but how do you use that basis of trust and compliance across multiple myriad organisations? And the answer really is to provide that common denominator of trust across those organisations. And this is where compliance can really start to come in and give you that thing to say, well, we're going to have to do this. So if we're going to have to do this, and it's fundamental to our business operations, why not do it properly? Why not do it organisationally and try to make the best of it that we can, so that we can provide that common basis of understanding, so we don't have to go out and audit and test and check every single partner, because we all conform to that common standard. And a lot of organisations are trying to say, well, let's take the lead on that because that makes our lives easier, and it actually speeds up. Because one thing about trust, and really what we're talking about is trust between organisations, trust speeds everything up. If you implicitly trust your business partners, then everything happens that bit faster. And we can tie that back to the compliance to say, okay, well, we know because we have a accreditation, a certification that is that basis of trust. How do we get this in place? Realistically, there are three predominant types of compliance. There is the compliance that is imposed upon us, that comes from politicians, laws, legislations, and effectively says, thou shalt do this or thou will not be able to perform, create, manage, work with, etc., etc., etc. We then have the internal rules inside your organisation that says this is how we do things around here, this is what we need to see, and this is what we have in place to make sure this organisation runs successfully and can transact and trade with its various business partners. And lastly, we obviously have our supply chain and supplier compliance, the people we have to deal with, and also our customers, to say how do we ensure and validate across this chain. And it really starts with this great word governance. Governance, and then from there, risk and compliance. So governance is the framework that you operate underneath it. Compliance is what tests to make sure that you adhere to that framework. And risk is what you measure as your own organisation, according to various principles. You have a profile of risk. Now, we have customers ranging from people building nuclear power stations right down to advertising agencies. Now, one is common is it's unlikely that they both have the same security and certification and validation for their internal systems for their business processes. So each organisation needs to understand what is an acceptable level for that organisation based on the fact that compliance and security is always that balance between hassle and users trying to accept it, and capability. And if you make it too onerous, then guess what? Your users are going to try everything they can in their lives to try and get round it. And if you make it too lax, then obviously you're opening the door potentially to things that you really don't want to happen inside your organisation. Risk is also a thing that your governors, trustees, boards of directors, etc. will be talking about, because typically one of the main functions of boards, of trustees or whatever, is actually managing organisational risk and making sure that happens. So this isn't an IT problem. This is a business problem that IT can help solve, primarily because more and more of our business processes, and really the IT departments predominantly are the people where the business processes hit the organisation, because they're all embedded in computer systems, primarily because we've all worked out that the best way to run a business process these days is to digitise it and put it in a computer system, can help the board manage the elements of risk that are around security, business processes, business transactions and business continuity, because without what we do, businesses don't operate. Anybody here can survive 5 days without computer systems? No? If I'd asked that 10 years ago, I think a few people would have probably said, yes, we probably could. Does anybody still have those manual processes to go back to if they really need them? You can't. Simple. So what we're doing is trying to help organisations work with them to say, OK, let's use compliance as the basis for assessing risk, managing and putting an acceptable level of risk, and the controls around it. And risk is very simply, what are the threats? And then you've got to work out, OK, how likely is that to happen to us? Obviously what we're dealing here is, this is all going to be modelling conjecture. You're never going to categorically know for certain. And lastly, you've got to say, well, if it does happen, what's going to happen to us? Is it actually worth working? And that is when you get to your level of acceptable organisational risk and how you do. And most organisations, and we will help organisations run things called risk registers, which I'm pretty sure most of you are aware of. And then we manage those to say, OK, on the basis of probability, what do we need to be doing something about something at this point in time? And simplistically, what you just need to do is to say, well, we're going through a period of technological and operational change in IT, borderless networks, etc., etc., etc. How do we map what we're currently doing in IT to the current risk landscape? So, what do? We would suggest, and my first major point, is that there is actually a return on investment for you and your organisation if you embrace compliance and say, yes, this can be really good stuff for us to work with. Okay? Now, I know it's hassle, it sounds like more work, it sounds like, oh my God, I'm opening up a world of pain. Any change in life, I've always likened to this thing of pushing a boulder up a hill. When you start trying to push that boulder up a hill, it's bloody hard work. But actually, the more people you get to help you and the more widely it is dispersed, then it becomes a little bit easier. And when you actually get to the top of the hill and finally get over to the flat or even downhill on the other way, it suddenly gains its own momentum. And really, this is where compliance starts. It is absolutely horrible to start with. I know this. Fordway started on an ISO 9000 journey about 14 years ago, Nev? Probably. And I'm not a person, I have to say, who really likes writing stuff down, number one, and secondly, conforming to a written process, because I always think there's a better way of doing it or there's an easy, quick way around it, okay? So that took us probably 4 or 5 years to really get it properly. Then we got 14,000, then 27,000, 20,000, 22,301, and now we're in a state where actually adding new certifications, I wouldn't say it's trivial, but we're probably 3 months from 27 to 22,301. You know, we're sort of picking up certifications as they go because we've done the hard work. But more importantly, that proves to our customers, you nice people in the room, and other people who might want to deal with Fordway, okay, these guys can say what they do what they say they do because it is independently certified, and we can show you it is all written down, it is all ready to go, it is all available. And if you can do that to your trading partners, then you make life an awful lot quicker and simpler, because they can say there is a validation or verification of trust that says how we do it. So, how do we make it happen? Well, first of all, you've got to know who you need to be compliant with whom, okay, and agree some common standards. If you see someone who's got ISO 9000 or ISO 27000, you sort of say, right, we know these guys are good enough because we know that their standards are up to a certain level, so therefore we can base this trust. It is quite a lot of pain and hard work to get to there, and it is equally as important, and I've got to say this is sort of about cloud, it's equally important no matter how you run your IT services, because even if you just use a bunch of SaaS services, ultimately your organisation is still holding you responsible and accountable for the validity, the capacity, the performance, the security and the availability of those services. Even should you engage partners like Fordway to help deliver those for you, ultimately your organisational risk stays with your organisation. So, what do we need to do? Well, there are some very good standards. Okay, I would say that I'm going to come onto a couple in a second, and there's a journey to those standards. But for IT security, obviously ISO 27001 is seen as the gold standard. But there are nice interim steps along the way that we can help us to get there. What we can also do is say, well, it's actually not as time consuming, because most organisations have ways of doing stuff. And really what the auditor is coming in to do is to say, okay, you've defined how you do it. Obviously they want to check, and your business needs to say, well, that process is suitable and fit for purpose. But what they're coming in to say, are you actually consistently following it? So you get to write your own processes to suit your organisations and procedures. What we can come in is with some templates to say, well, here's a good starting point that we can then adapt to help you get to that point in time. If it's appropriate, look at your supply chain. You know, we have to have, for example, so we use data centres, as you all know. We have a couple of data centres. We have to ensure that our data center providers are ISO 27000 certified. If they give us a certificate, a valid certificate, we do not necessarily have to go and fully audit them every time we want to do something, you know, and this makes life much more simple. It's some SaaS providers. There aren't actually that many of the major SaaS providers who are 27000 certified, so please watch out, because mostly a lot of them are American, and that really hasn't taken on so much. There are FIPS and FedRAMP and stuff like that which you can use as proxies, but they're not quite the same. Okay, so if you want that certainty, if you are moving your service onto SaaS and platform PaaS services, do check that if it's important, particularly if you're UK government organisations or public sector, because they want to see the badges. There are quite a lot of organisations that are, you know, major SaaS providers that don't have the relevant badges at this point in time. And then understand, identify and analyse. And what I'm going to do is a very simple step. So I'm sure most of you have heard of Cyber Essentials. Okay, Cyber Essentials was very simplistically a government guidance document that basically said there are 10 key elements to information security inside an organisation that you should adhere to. And Cyber Essentials on its own is basically a checklist run by very, you know, either internally or possibly a very quick and simple external audit that says, yes, you comply to these 10 basic information security texts. It's got a big brother called Cyber Essentials Plus. And Cyber Essentials Plus comes in with that external audit from a CREST certified auditor. And again, we can help and have helped several of our customer organisations through the Cyber Essentials journey to get the Plus that says, okay, a suitably certified, qualified, independent assessor has come in and given us that stamp of approval, and will do so against these principles every year. But the great thing about going to Cyber Essentials Plus is actually, well, you've done 60–70% of the work to start getting towards ISO 27000. And it's actually not a big uplift. So if you started as an organisational strategy around security, step 1, step 2, and then step 3, you know, it becomes considerably easier, because the basis of Cyber Essentials, most people inside this room will be pretty close, if not already, on Cyber Essentials. Quite a useful badge to have. Okay. The next step, as I say, get the external audit in, not onerous. What does it take us? 2 days? You know, reasonable size organisation, maybe 4 or 5 days, you know, to do those independent validation, 1 annual certification, and suddenly you can say to the world at large, we can be trusted for information security because we have this badge, which is pretty good. what the ISO 27000 does, this is how you enforce the practices. ISO 20000 is much more about procedures and policies. Okay, so that's the bit to say. So we're enforcing it with Cyber Essentials Plus. Now we uplift to ISO 27000, that we're writing down the procedures, policies and standards that we want to operate to make sure that we maintain Cyber Essentials Plus, but this is actually how we do it. And then you're separately audited on how well you conform to those standards you say. Okay, so if you would like to talk to us about that, we would be absolutely delighted to talk to you about it. Okay, very happy to help.